Okay, so today we are building a drone that basically costs 150. So for 150, I'll have all these parts linked down below, but I got all of this for 150. The only other thing that I had to get separately was the receiver for the remote. In this case, we are using a Spectrum receiver, but there are a lot cheaper and better options out there than Spectrum. I just happen to have a Spectrum remote right by me, and so that's is what the drone is going to be on, is Spectrum. So in the box we get the flight control board, we get two sets of props, ESC, the frame, motors, and everything else. So we're going to start assembling the frame first. Okay, so what are we going to do on the frame is we're going to take this plate right here, and we're also going to take these nuts, and they are kind of a little thing in the corner, and it looks like it basically is rounded all the way around and then has some serrated on the middle, and they are made just to push onto these, and so that's what we're going to do, is push them on the four corners here. And I usually like to just use a little bit of leverage to basically just push these together, and you want to get it kind of flush as you do this. Okay, after we get those four in, we're actually going to do these middle four as well. Okay, so now after we get all 8 of those in, what are we going to do is we're going to take this bottom plate. This is the top plate, you can tell because the bottom plate will match up, the holes will match up with this piece. And we're going to stack this plate, and then we're going to put the arms on it like this. And then the top plate on top. And then I'm going to use these smaller screws right here, small silver screws for I'm going to do on all four of these middles. And then for these outside ones, I'm going to use these long ones, and then we're going to put our ESC on these long ones later as well. Okay, so now you should have all of them on. You should have the screws pulling up, and everything should be nice and tight. You shouldn't have anything loose or wiggly in this whole setup. We're going to pause on the frame build for now because we're going to move on to building, and we're going to build it onto the frame. And so it's easier to build on the frame when you don't have standoffs or anything else in the way. So we're going to start now by installing the motors, which are these, and there's just these ones. I happen to get the 1750 kV motors, and these are just because we wanted the option of going success if wanted to, but I don't know if they'll even be flown on success. Right now, this drone's planning on being flown with 4S. However, you can get away with success. These motors look pretty cool, and they match our red theme going on as well, going on with the drone with everything being okay. So how we're going to do it is I like to, in the little bag that we got of bolts and stuff, I like to put the nut on the motor for now. This just prevents me from losing it, and it just keeps it together. And so we're going to take the arm. I'm going to use these. They came with the frame. They're just TPU things that clip on the sides, and it creates like a extra protection on the bottom for landing, as well as the corners and the sides for when you crash as well, because you will crash with these. And then we're going to take the motor, and you're going to want to line it up and we're going to put all 4 screws through the back. And I'm going to go through and do them on all 4 of these. One of the things to mention now that I'm noticing it is these screws. I don't know if you can see on the camera, but they are just as long as the frame. So they actually will not go all the way through the frame. Now, looking at these other screws that we got with our case, they all look about the same. For me, I have hundreds of spare screws, so this isn't a problem. However, if you're building this yourself, this may be an issue for you mounting your motor onto the frame. Okay, so now that you got all these on, you can notice I didn't use these just because I didn't actually have screws that was long enough to go all the way through the frame and this. But I did have plenty of other screws. If you do not have enough screws, you can just do a cross, do 2 screws on each motor. I've seen a lot of people do it. Most people actually do it. I still put 4 screws on because I like to be safe, but it's not really a big requirement in that front. Next thing we're going to get out is our ESC. Okay, so with the receiver, it did not come with rubber grommets. I usually like to put like rubber grommets in here just so it's not like sitting in here because yeah, I don't trust that very much. So instead of these long screws, I actually have a bunch of these anti-vibration mounts from my other drone. And so what I was going to do, so I was going to take these and we're going to use some shorter screws and go through the frame and go into these anti-vibrations. And then the flight control board will just sit right there on top of them. And then we'll just put a nut on the top to hold the flight control board onto these anti-vibration mounts. This also allows it so that we can choose basically the length. So if we have another component we're stacking on here, which I do, we're going to put a VTX on this one. We can add additional length to it as necessary by just adding more of these spacers, which the frame does come with a bunch of these plastic ones as well. So you do not have to have those rubberized ones. So I'm going to do that now. One thing I want to point out while I'm finishing this is the fact that you don't have to do it like this. You can keep the long screws. You just need some sort of spacer. I actually have some right here. Um, show you guys. So it's just a little plastic circle basically, and it just is used to separate the flight control board. Well, not the flight control board in this instance, the ESC from the frame, and this just prevents any um, shortages, but because the frame being carbon fiber is conductive, so you don't want flight your ESC to sit directly on that flight control board. So having something in between is better than having absolutely nothing in between. So I personally am doing it this way just because of the fact that it makes my life a whole lot easier. For this build as well, I'm going to have the ESC. You really can mount this whichever way, and then later in Betaflight, you'll actually have to tell it which motor's which so that you can have um, motor, I think it's motor 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't remember off the top of my head in Betaflight, but you have to change the direction based on that. And so I do want to see, I do have a pretty long cord, so we are mounting our flight control board in the back right here actually this is the back. We're going to mount it in the back right here, and that's where our flight control board is going to be. I am going to mount the ESC actually like this. This makes it so that the plug coming off this is going to stick up like this on the side of the drone, and that's how I'm going to do it on this build. But let me solder on the XC60, just check making sure positive, negative, and then you put the capacitor on there as well, positive, negative. Make sure you just directly on the pads as well. And then I'm also going to trim these motor wires up. I'm going to solder the motor wires on to the corresponding pads, M1, motor 1, and so on, doing the 3 closest pads basically to the motor. And I'll have my connector right here as well, and I'm going to fold that down and under, and that should connect on over. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so now that we got everything attached, we got the motors trimmed up and attached all up to the ESC here. We got our connectors wired up and our capacitor. Yes, I'm going to put a heat shrink around this later. I just haven't found it. You don't have to do it the same way. You can do it however you want. I would recommend having the capacitor on there, however. That's going to help protect everything. And our next step is to pull out our flight control board. The nice thing about this one is it does have a little diagram of how to kind of put it together in the sense, as well as on here, which is what I'll be using, is a sticker with all the logos basically telling you what every pad does and stuff like that as well. The cord that comes with this for the ESC to connect it with the ESC isn't very long, so I am going to be using the one that goes with the ESC. However, seeing how these are different brands, these do not line up exactly with going from one to the other. So what I am going to do is I'm going to cut this off at the very end, and I'm going to solder it to the point. I'm going to use these as a reference guide. It's marked right here on the flight control board. Circuit TX4321, VTX, and ground, and they're all labeled here. So it's like a matching game basically. I'm going to go through and match them all, and I'm going to solder them all so that they're sticking kind of inwards, so they fall onto the pads is how I'm going to do this. So let me do this now. Okay, we just wired all these pads up on the side of the ESC so that they correlate correctly with this plugging into the thing. We do have an extra wire hanging off on the flight control board, which is a TX, and seeing how I don't get ESC signal, I'm not like transmitting anything really to the ESC. I'm just going to pull out this wire right out of the thing, and then if I need to, I can slide it back in later. However, we don't. So I'll just keep that out for now. Everything is wired to there. And so the next thing we are going to do is to mount up this flight control board. On the back, we do have some screw holes that are 20 by 20, which is what this flight control board is. In the package of the flight control board, we do get these gummies as well for the flight control board, so that's what we're going to use back here. It also doesn't seem like it comes with proper screws for the flight control board, and the flight control board doesn't seem to have came with any either. However, I do have some extras here, so I'm going to mount this up real fast. Okay, so now we have the flight control board wired up and mounted. You can see back here it's mounted. It also came with gummies, so we aren't sitting on the metal as well, which makes it nice. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start with our VTX is what we're going to start with. It's in this package right here. And in the package we get the VTX, and we also get this antenna piece. This antenna piece will connect to the end right here. For this, you just push it in. I'm going to do this later though, because I want to mount this up before before I install this. But at the end of it, it will end up going in here and mounting on the back. We'll do this later though. Let's work on the actual VTX itself. Comes with this harness that we're going to unwrap. For the harness, I wouldn't cut these much shorter because our flight control board that we're going to solder this to is all the way in the back. So I like to insert it here, and then I can see it tells you right on the VTX where each one of these will go. And I am going to fold this over, and I am taking these plastic mounts basically that are came with the kit for the frame, and we're just screwing those on there so it looks like a double standoff thing. And then I'm going to stick the VTX right on top of everything, sandwiching it all together, and then we're going to wire it back here. Um, we are going to put the VTX on UART3, which will be the well, actually this one doesn't have smart audio, so we're just going to wire up video, ground, and voltage in. Those are the only 3 wires that you'll need. So actually on here, I'm going to pull out these 2 wires I do not need, which are the 5-volt out. Actually, let me verify on my camera real fast. Okay, yeah, we don't need them. It comes with its own harness and everything, and that will go to straight into our flight control board. So we do not need these 2 wires, which is the power out and ground right next to it. In this case, this is the green wire if you have the same one as me as well. Okay, so just verified. We have this blue wire here on the specific one, which is labeled ICR, which is we're going to wire to TX3. So let me get this all put together and wired up. Okay, so I just finished that. I wired it up. I did video to the VTX, and then I did all the pads around the VTX. This blue wire for the smart REO thing for the IRC, I actually wired that to TX1 because that was right next to all the other pads for the VTX, so I just kept that the same. Now we're going to start on the camera itself. Open this on up. The one thing you'll notice too is that you get a little tiny button thing right here, and that's actually a remote, and there's a separate plug right next to it, the small one with only 2 pins, it's not 3, and that's to change OSDs if you want to do OSD straight from your camera. However, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to set up in betaflight, so I get betaflight OSDs. The other thing as well is these are going to be your mount for the camera. Right here, so just these mounts itself is going to be too far apart, so you're going to have to make a spacer. They make a spacer that comes in your kit that we're basically going to install the camera in, and then that acts like a little guide for where the screws can go in nicely and fit between these two plates. I prefer when I do this as well to take the plates off and then screw them on and then attach it all to the frame, and that's how I'm going to do it. And then for these wires, there's a 3 wires. This one's pretty simple, and it's just going to go to the cam. I'm going to go to the 9 volts because this camera can take it, and then the ground as well. So, and they're all color coded yellow to video and etc. So I'm going to do that now. One thing to notice actually real quick is that this does not reach all the way to the back where our flight control board is, so we're gonna have to extend the wires. We can extend the wires pretty easy by using our leftover wires that we pulled out earlier, or if you have a longer harness, then you can use that as well. I don't know if I have one, so I'll see what I end up doing. Okay, now that we got all this connected, we got the camera connected. I ended up extending these, just using the extra wires from earlier as well, going all the way to the back. Now is onto the receiver. Almost pretty much all of you will have a different receiver than me, but make sure you put out to UART2, which is RX and TX2, and make sure you put TX to RX and RX to TX. And yeah, so I'll wire it up, mine up, and get going. Okay, so now we have the receiver hooked up as well, and we pretty much have everything hooked. all together up now. So what we're going to do is put on the standoffs. It comes with a bunch of these black screws, and that's what we're going to use to stick through the frame and screw to the standoffs. There's going to be 8 in total, 4 on each side, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so now that we got all the standoffs on, just halfway, we have to finish up a few things before we put it completely together. Also, this red piece that we got with the frame too, it's optional, but this piece goes right up here. And that's also to kind of protect the frame a little up in the front, just around the edge. For the back over here, I think I'm going to try using these. Um, gives gives me a little something, somewhere to put everything. For our antenna, for our VTX that came with our VTX, there's a little screw that's on it. So when you unscrew it, there'd be a screw and a washer that will connect. And so we're just going to want to insert that through and then screw the nuts and washer onto the other side. Tighten this on up. And then what we're going to do is now we're going to insert, once it's tight, mine's not tight yet, but put it onto our standoffs on the back right here, and then plug in our other end to our VTX as well. Okay, so now we got that installed. You can see that we got a 3D printed part in the back. I am noticing that my antennas are really flimsy, and because I had this on a different drone before, the antennas aren't really straight either, so putting them out the back I don't think is the best idea. So I'm going to do the zip tie method, which basically you put zip ties here and then put the antenna along and heat shrink it. I'm going to do that later though, but other than that, we have our whole drone. Besides our props, we can stick our props on and tighten up the nuts, but you literally just put on this top plate and we have our drone. That is a whole drone under. I'm going to mount this to the top with M3 tape up here in the back just because there's a lot of room, but I'm going to do that later. We're going to call it the video, because this is it. This is your $150 5-inch build. We'll see you guys in the next video.